Welcome, everybody, to episode 17 of the Funding Matters webinar series. Today's topic is something that we've been talking about for a better part of the last year, and that's artificial intelligence, AI. And in some cases, we've talked about artificial intelligence in the context of having better donor conversations. But that narrative has changed over the past year. AI has changed. If you haven't noticed, you've probably been using different AIs to be doing different things in your organizations or in your personal lives. And one of the things that really emerges about AI is every single day, something new about AI comes to the fore. So if it's not just you and your organizations, I can guarantee that your board members are also using AI in their own personal lives, if not in what they're doing with your organizations. So we're really excited to be kind of reintroducing this conversation because we, since the last time we've been presenting this topic, have been working earnestly at trying to understand and try to build, that model that works for organizations just like yours, but also works for your board members, and more importantly, building the trust of your board members that this is an ideal strategy to be going in. So, one of the things about AI, and I'm sure that each and every one of you have sort of had a scenario that you've run into running out of credits. You've kind of just blown through, if you're on OpenAI or Claude or whatever you're using, and your Perplexity, and you're playing around with it. And then the next thing it says is refresh credits. Well, on the way to work today, and not even thinking about our conversation for this webinar, one of the major banks in New York, their executive got presented with a big problem. All the people in the bank, because they got AI and they got all these tokens and credits for their employees at the bank. But yesterday, that CEO was presented with a fact that their AI credits had all been used up, gone. So now everybody's sitting at their terminals, on their phones, on their AI, looking for an answer. And the bank just burnt through, and they had to, and that means they burnt through their budget. So the CEO had to go to the CFO and say, look it, we just went through this. Now, there's a different element to all of this, and today's session is going to touch on a little bit of that and the economies of scale and implementation of AI. And once again, I am joined by two great knowledge fonts in both capital campaigning, organizational development, coaching, donor conversations, and the implementation of how AI fits into all of that. And I'm joined by Kensho Hang. Hey, Kensho, how's it going?
Hi, everyone.
And and James Murphy, and both the three of us are like three musketeers. We're constantly running with these different ideas and concepts. But more importantly, Kensho, how does this actually, this news story breaking, hit you?
Nice to meet you all here and super happy to see so many interested faces. A little bit of context about myself. I've been in the AI space since before AI was AI or ChatGPT. I've been really focusing on consulting and helping businesses hold their hands and navigate through the craziness, exactly what Bill said. And to Bill's comment on how crazy, organizations are realizing, oh my God, like we're spending so much or we don't know what, that's exactly the case we've noticed in every single segment is that nobody was told or trained on how to use AI and now have to wear another hat and become an AI expert when you're already so overwhelmed with your day-to-day job. So really part of what I'm seeing with these token things is not actually the fault of the organization, but just the lack of training amongst their knowing, right? I've seen so many cases where someone was just excited to use AI in the organization, accidentally turned on an automation that ran 5 times the speed it should have, and charged a few $1,000s within seconds. And that's not actually the AI's fault. It was the person, but the person also didn't know. So that's really the disconnect that we're noticing is without the right structure, without the right guidance, without the right tools or platforms and the right hand holding, it is naturally overwhelming and it is hard to navigate that. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot of organizations facing, let alone these huge banks are facing as well. So really the goal of today is to give you guys some of that resource and find the right tools to
Somebody's
get you guys
talking.
in the right next steps.
Is it? Oh,
So, what are the things that AI can be offering to you and your organization? And one of the fundamentals of all of whatever you're going to be introducing for an organization is got to be based on trust. And trust really has to come from the trust of the board and the things that the boards are presented with in terms of things that they need to be thinking about, because they're the ultimate, decision makers on budgets. So whether it's, the example of the bank, or more importantly, it's the example of your own organizations, small, medium, large institutions, all looking at how does that AI fit into that your framework as Kensha was describing. There's a framework that works best, but this is an evolving process as well for many of these organizations. So James, on looking at trust and ensuring that you get the trust of your board to be onboarding a lot of these ideas. Like boards are entrusted to, make the decisions on go or no go on campaigns. It's the recommendation of the management of the team of the ED, but ultimately, the buck stops with, the board, in terms of budgets. This whole notion of trust and AI, how does that play out for you?
Well, I mean, I hear this all the time in terms of how do we build better relations with our board? How do we engage them more in fundraising, et cetera, et cetera? That's the broad picture. That, on AI, on the AI part, I mean, as you say, the board's looking for guidance on these things. What's your strategy going to be? How does this impact our organization? What do we need to address in terms of AI? What are the risks and opportunities here? Because ultimately, that's what the board is asking. So, how do we manage our risk around this kind of thing? So it's really an opportunity. I think it's another avenue for fundraisers and executives in fundraising to build that trust-based relationship with the board. And AI is not the only area where this can happen, but it's obviously hugely salient right now, and everyone's thinking about it. So the better equipped you are to go in and say, here's how we manage our CRM. Here's how we manage donor conversations. Here's the impact. Here's the ROI. Here's the improvement we're going to see over time. All of these kinds of things are there for fundraisers to come up with ways to take those things to the board and get them behind them and build that trust that you know what you're doing.
One of those areas, and great point, James. One of the areas that, what can AI offer? Well, AI can offer everything to you because AI is kind of an answer machine. And early on, over the past, several years, we've been always looking at, what kind of role can AI be playing? Because it's evolved, from what we were building out in 2018, 2019 with chatbots, and going into explaining, the tax benefits of giving with Giftulator. One of the areas that, we began to look and investigate further is that role that AI can play. Now, if you look at all of these areas that AI can play for you and your organizations, you're going to say, yes, I can agree to all of them. But if you did all of them, that goes back to how efficient is this? Where is that information getting stored? How is that information getting stored? What is it does it go into your CRM? Is your CRM built to actually incorporate a lot of the outcomes that are being developed and that your AI, your co-pilots, imagine all of these points as co-pilots. So you start to look at, all of these different things or a co-pilot trying to do all of these things. And the answer is very simple. One co-pilot can't do all these things. And reality is if it does, how does that get stored? How does that get regenerated? How do you start building that fundraising brain for yourself in your outreach to your prospects? And that in itself is a bit of a large undertaking. And how is that undertaking going to be developed? And Kensha,
Yep.
we've gone through the development of this model and try to incorporate all of these aspects. But one single co-pilot or a number of co-pilots that get worked into the scenarios, it doesn't work. So how do we build that brain effectively?
I think a lot of organizations try to jump straight in and go head deep into, hey, we need AI this, AI that. That is the last thing you want to do when you're, adding AI into it. I always say this kind of one line is when you add AI to a broken process or a broken system, it's only going to exacerbate and make it worse, right? It's multiplying what the broken system already is. So what I generally recommend every organization to do is if you have time or if you're able to find an AI partner, is to actually map out across every single person from executive to leadership to department to every single member of your team and understand, where are the things breaking? How do we fix the processes that are broken before we add AI? And a lot of times it comes down to something as simple as, hey, we realized everyone is just writing down, just like myself, even in the AI space, little post-it notes everywhere. And because of that, nobody knows what the heck is going on for the rest of the organization. There's so many layers that need to be fixed before adding AI. And then when you do that, is picking one or two directions, whether it's a department, whether it's the leadership, whether it's a few people you've identified in your organization that are good with AI, train them, make sure they're really good, and then start piloting department by department and rolling it out in a controlled manner. Because just to Bill's point, you could build 1,000 AI models or 1,000 AI agents, but if they don't follow a proper flow or a process or don't even fit in correctly, then you're just kind of throwing a tool for the sake of throwing a tool. And that's why so many organizations are going, hey, why did I spend a few $1 million on AI and we don't know what we're doing? It's because they were like, I need to rush to the buzz. I need to throw AI everywhere. I see a tool, I'm just going to buy it. That is not AI implementation because all of a technology requires training, it requires adoption, it requires hand holding, it requires your team to understand what is being replaced and why. And when you build that, then you can add AI models, AI agents, and then determine when the right case and right time is.
James, when you start to look at if you had to, as on the administrative side of a charitable organization, and you had to go and tell your board, these are all the things that I'd love my AI to do. And the board would go, whoa, you know what? If you can get that to happen, well, that's perfect. But the idea is what's the right AI for the right task? So if you start to look at all of these AIs, some are very familiar, Chat, Gemini, Claude,
Mm-hmm.
Sora. So whoever's using Sora, Sora doesn't exist any longer. So if you were using Sora and you're building sort of narratives and storytelling and other aspects of it, if you're with Microsoft and you're using their Copilot, but their Copilot doesn't seem to actually fit properly with the other activities and tasks that you've got set forth. So a lot of these AIs are falling by the wayside, and because they're not generating the revenue that they thought they'd be generating, whereas others are doing a bang up job and generating this kind of revenue. So if you start to think about that word trust, and how does trust factor into the ability to actually pick? Are we like going to be, is it a beauty contest? Are we picking which AI we want to be going with to go back to satisfy, all of these things? Or is it a concerted tech stack strategy where it's all in one place?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that's going to evolve from all of this is the fact that your pool, your ocean of data is going to be housed somewhere. And the reality is today that the databases that you're currently using are not going to be as relevant tomorrow as they are today. I just finished a conversation with one of the hospital, one of the universities, and they're basically in year three, and they still don't have their database operating the way they want. Major institutions, big onboarding, and it's still not working the way that they want it to work. The reality is these are multi-million dollar investments in some institutions, if not tens of thousands of dollars for others. But the reality is to look at a database that actually is your database, that is actually so. And when I say that, Kensho is probably way better than I am, but I'm going to tell you that you could look at with one of our tech stacks and just copy a database that exists and actually modify it and customize it to your own purposes. And that's a reality. We could copy it in 2 hours and give it back to you within. So that's where you start to see the Microsoft shares collapse, Salesforce shares down by 70%, other software like HubSpot down 60%. So all of these organizations, because they're running off of these copilot models, there's like bits and pieces here and there that actually don't really add up to building that brain for your organization, for yourself.
I think it ties back to Kensho's point too, which was spot on about the process and the implementation. And here's the point I'd make about that is that over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen a lot of incremental improvements in technology. This is not incremental. This is a massive change. And that process becomes much more important to ask yourself, what is this? What is AI for us? What is the purpose here? What are we using it for? What do we want it to do? What are the outcomes? And imagine asking those questions about your CRM. Yeah, it would be meaningless. But now you're talking about something that has a far-reaching impact. So in that space of uncertainty, you keep referring to trust. This is where you need to have clear what your clear objectives are and your strategy is to approach this. And I think that's absolutely critical to this conversation.
And I'll add a quick note. I mean, in terms of data, a lot of organizations, try to rush and throw everything in at once. And yeah, AI is great with a lot of data, but the biggest thing is garbage in, garbage out. We all know, like we all have different drives or Outlook and Microsoft just with a bunch of open files and messy files. Something as simple as even just dragging some of those loose files into a folder that says for finance, for organizations, for clients, is something as simple as that allows the AI to at least know where to go with it. And that's a step-by-step process to James's point, right? And then you pick a department. I've seen some organizations and worked with some where they literally said, hey, could we set up a brand new database with nothing in it? Let's start with finance. Let's start with accounting. Let's do it step by step. And yes, they have the old documents, but it's taking such a messy one from before, slowly cleaning the garbage, then adding a clean one. So then what the AI has is a fresh database, good data, clean data, structures that were built for the right reason. And then you move forward into a much more powerful organization. And, a lot of organizations don't realize how powerful having clean and proper data is, to the point every morning I wake up, my AI tells me a brief of all my emails sent, all my Slack messages, any invoices I'm missing out, all of these things. And that is because it's tied to clean data, right? If you have bad data, then the emails it tells you might completely be wrong. The invoices might not even be correct. So all of these are step-by-step processes. And it really comes down to you understanding where does it fit in and building the structure around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, good points, guys. So one of the areas that we want to focus on, and we're just going to just pick one slice, and that is having donor conversations. How do we even get to the donor conversations, and how can AI be a part of that? Because one of the aspects of fundraising is getting in front of a donor, having a conversation with a prospect, stewarding a relationship, but we lack the coaching. We lack the ability to practice. We lack the script writing. And sure, you can go to an AI and just type in a scenario, but that ongoing handling objections and what your role and what your goals are is really important. So we're going to take two scenarios here. One is a role play conversation with a family office. Like, what's a family office? Have we ever dealt with a family office? If I'm at the organization, how am I going to be reaching out? Because family offices are looking at incorporating philanthropy into their daily business. So when they're managing the money, when they're managing their own money or money for other people, one of those things that really emerges is a lot of those individuals in that family office have philanthropic, charitable inclinations. So this is what we're starting to look at is how can we be working in terms of, in this particular scenario, focusing on nursing scholarships. These are first looking at first generation. These are a lot of them are bean counters, they're accountants, they're finance people, they're investment people. They look at measurable outcomes. And so these are all aspects that would help prepare you for a conversation with the Feldman Family Office. The other one is looking at handling objections and creating a strategy with Margaret Chin. So we're going to be walking through and showing the ideal situation for an organization like yours that builds the fundraising brain, that builds the fundraising brain for the organization, that builds it for your board members, that builds it for your team as well. Because your team, you might be your team, or you may be a member of an advancement of a development office of a fundraising operation that has different responsibilities. A person who's responsible for major and planned giving, a person who's responsible for the comprehensive campaign, annual giving, stewardship, corporate giving. So these are all different, segments that can be focused on through a strategy like this. So when we start to go into the next steps, I'm just going to go back one, okay, and then I'm going to jump over, and I hope. So can you see my screen now? Everybody, anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your campaign run by a brain that never forgets. So that's the role of your CRM. But your CRM actually it has that information in it. But it has the name, it has the address, it has who they're connected with, what they've given in the past. That's really good information. It's how do we go beyond that? Because within your organizations, I'm sure there have been retirements, there have been transitions, there have been movement, there have been people who have left for various reasons to go to other organizations, and that seat remains empty until it's filled again. But the institutional information, the information regarding those prospects exists, and it exists within the framework of who they are and what the relationship is. But more importantly, it's for you to build your data pool of information regarding these individuals. So if I just walk you through a scenario, and this is, very preliminary information. It's information about the organization. It's information about the foundation. It's got, the charitable registration number. It has what sector it happens to be in, and this is healthcare. The year founded, we could change that. What the website happens to be, all that information, and then we go into continue. And as soon as we hit continue, the AI brain starts to capture all that information from that previous page and starts to populate it. It gives you your mission statement. It gives you the innovation and values. It gives you who your top, performing areas that you're focusing on happen to be. What are the metrics that you're hoping to achieve in terms of numbers of surgeries, numbers of graduates, meals served, things along those lines. That starts to attract them. Then we start to look at, again, that's going to all be populated, but you can modify all of this information in terms of the fundraising team size. So we can actually say there are 4 people and there are 1,850 donors, or we could say that they're, large, a larger number of donors. So we put a comma there and do that. So we have 18,000 active donors. Then we're looking at what is our ongoing revenue and what are we looking at achieving in terms of that? What are the revenue channels that we're securing funding from? What do we want to be securing funding from? Maybe corporations, maybe monthly giving. We want to have a planned giving program. So how does that planned giving program start to fit into the entire model of what it is that we want? Then we start to look at what your existing systems are. You can have Razor's Edge, you can have Donor Perfect, you can have Salesforce, you can have just spreadsheets of information or something else. And we don't, whatever other systems that are out there. But the idea is you do have a current back end. It could be as simple as the Excel or as, intricate as, anybody else. And then talking about your board and how engaged are your board? What are some of the biggest fundraising obstacles that you're facing? And then we get into what's the campaign all about. So each and every individual might have their own campaign that they're focusing on. This one happens to be a surgical innovation wing that's underway. It's a $12 million project. It's a capital campaign, or it could be, depending on what your role is in the organization, it could be, me as an annual funding person who's focusing on stewardship. And then how much is the goal? How much has been raised? So this is all the presets. What's the timeline? We've got an 18-month timeline to actually have this campaign because I'm new in the organization. I just arrived. Today's day one, and I want to get up and running as quickly as possible. So then we start to look at the summary of the case, and that gets populated in from the information that gets loaded in. The naming opportunities, what are some of the naming values that are available? And then we start to drag and drop the documents. Strat plan, a case for support, annual reports, donor lists, and on a CSV file. Brand and style guidelines. Why do we have brand and style guidelines? So you don't have to go and look for what your logo is and what your colors are. It starts to get populated, whether you're going to be putting a proposal, a mini case for support, or a customized case for support, an email, whatever that's going to be. What are some of the past campaign materials? Why do we ask for past campaign materials? Because a lot of the individuals that you're going to be meeting with were involved in those past campaigns, that they may be asking questions about that. Having who's on your board. Donors are always interested to say, who's on your board? Who's the leadership? Who's the chair? What's the makeup look like? What is the giving by your board, or the past boards? What are your gift acceptance policies? And that's an area that, often just gets sort of overlooked, what the policies are. Develop those policies, integrate them into the process so that people can actually see how that works. Looking at the impact reports. And we always know that, for every type of institution, they have their own impact outlines that they're looking for. And then what are some of the naming opportunities? What are the descriptions? What are the values? What are other aspects of this that are going to be part of this? So we've got, all of this information. And then we get into, hey, good afternoon, Kensho. So this is now you're at step one. So the first part was really building that initial organizational fundraising brain for you on a daily basis. Kensho, you want to add anything, or James?
Yeah, of course. I mean, really the rationale when we were talking about processes and everything is, when we were working on building this demo and really setting up the initial baseline of it, is just thinking about all the repetitive processes and systems that every single organization faces when they're setting up a campaign, and thinking about how to reach out to a donor. So what that long process ahead of time, even though it's so many questions, is you're training the AI brain on what is your campaign, what is your organization. That file drag and drop is everything the AI needs to know about your organization. Even something as random as branding helps with the AI. How does it talk to your donors? And then once you get to here, this is really your campaign intelligence, right? Your brain. Anything that you add on to, any step that you go deeper into, all of this is feeding your AI brain on when you're every single campaign that you have, every conversation you have, this AI brain will be nudging you so that you can go, hey, what's happening on this campaign? Oh, 2 days ago, your sales team actually reached out to the person. They didn't actually get a response back. Here's a proactive nudge to reply to them. Oh, this conversation didn't really go well. Do you need some kind of strategy guidance? Is this AI is going to be the centralized workspace or brain to collect everything and anything happening to your campaign, and everything that you update to it, every change that you make, every conversation that you make is all built into this with the systems already built in. So you're actually just filling up a question and answer, filling up forms. But what's actually happening is while you're doing that, you're actually training the campaign brain. And then the real value is that brain becomes your kind of best friend for fundraising, for reaching out to donors, to all these things throughout the entire campaign from A to Z over a number of years.
which is really your ultimately at the end of all of this, it's your virtual philanthropic officer. So the objective of building where do we start after we populate the brain? We go to the brainstorming and strategy. So it's a seven-step process, but the brainstorming and strategy is what you see every morning when you turn on your Power Donor platform is that you're going to go to step one and you're going to have this completed. But what are you raising money for? What does this matter? Why is it important to the community? So that information and having that readily available actually can be populated into any of your external communications, including your phone calls, including the scripting that you would have in terms of outreach. What happens if you don't get the funding for the surgical wing? What happens if you don't hit that $12 million mark? So we want to be able to actually have that built in as well. But we start to look at the campaign goal. We're looking at how much has been raised to date. So the person is coming in, they're brand new. Ken shows in new into this, and he's already got a $1.4 million lead. But he's going to be working on a comprehensive campaign. It's going to be capital, it's going to be endowment, it's going to be annual. We're starting to look at, that's going to be his responsibility. And that's what many of your responsibilities are in terms of prospect identification and prospect engagement. And then we start to look at where we're at. What are some of the drivers? What are some of the competitors that are going to be that we're up against? What are other organizations so that that's all top of mind? You're not having to look anywhere for it. It's there. How ready is the board? Has all the board given? Have some of the board given? Have, nobody given? So, like, that is another question that really arises. And if it doesn't arise with the donor, you got to bring it somehow, you have to bring it into the conversation. We are in a campaign also in canvassing our board for their support. We're at halfway, we're at three quarters, we're just starting, whatever it happens to be. It's a comfort point for donors. And the minute that we can actually have that incorporated. So how did that last campaign go? What happened in the last campaign? Did you hit the goal? Did you exceed goal? What was it? What are the things that people are most interested in not in hearing, or what are turnoff points for donors? So we go into, remember, a $12 million campaign, but the idea is we want to be able to actually figure out what the strategy is, what the positioning statement is for that surgical innovation wing, or the whatever that priority is for your organization to be funding. And what are the pillars we start to implement? The pillars now come from the information that was populated in that step 1 through 5 in building the brain. What's the quiet phase going to be like? So if we're doing 12 mil and we're at 1.4, we want to be able to actually how many more gifts do we need at what levels? And we've seen the chart of standards over and over and over again. But this kind of spits that out. Now imagine trying to pull all of this together in one day, in one and a half a day, in a couple of hours. That's what you're going to be up and running with at this point. And you want to, what are the areas that you want to avoid? What are the things that we want to be coached on so we can lock that strategy in place? Now, when we lock the strategy in place, all of that goes into that brain for, our prospects. And so we want to go to step 2. And what are we looking at? So this is identifying the ICP. Who are we going to be approaching? Grateful patients, retired physicians, families, community members, other philanthropic individuals, family offices, so on and so forth. What kind of a range are we looking at? Well, this is a major campaign. So we're looking at as a floor of 100 to 500. And how do we actually focus on that? What are we going to be looking at in terms of some of these individuals? What is some of the information about that? What sort of information that we are looking at on the recognition side? People who are interested in public recognition, people are very private, anonymity around their giving. So we can just pick one of those. And then we can suggest ideal donor profiles as well. Grateful, innovator, quiet, community, faith-based. So that's another area that we can be looking at. But this is where it all comes together. This is on Monday morning when you open up your computer and give me my top 10 prospects to see. So I'm going to go see the Feldmans and I'm going to be pursuing Margaret. So these are the different capacities that they have. And because we're in cultivation with Margaret, she's been a good donor. Feldmans, they've been ongoing donors. So we want this to actually go and start looking at our next step with them. So we've got Margaret and we've got Feldman, and we can actually populate as many as we can actually handle at any point in time. But here she is, and here's a profile of Margaret. These are wealth signals, these are giving profiles. This is networking. So what we're extracting is information off the web. We're extracting information from LinkedIn. We're extracting from Zoom Info. We're extracting from your CRM. And so we're looking at all of these different areas for this specific Margaret Chen. You know, the Feldman family office is easier, but I'm sure there are a lot more Margaret Chens out there. But we just need to narrow our Margaret Chen to being that individual who's the retired medtech founder. And what did she do in her exit? And what are the things that took place? Or we go into the Feldman family office and we've got information about Noah Feldman and who are the other people that are associated with the family office that can be helping us. So now you've got the information right then and there. You show up, you turn your computer on, it's 9 a.m. By the time you look at this and you start to plan it out, this I want to save into my campaign memory. It's what Kenshin was saying was building that memory, building that institutional memory that takes us to the next step. And that is, how do we communicate? How do I book that first meeting for me with Margaret? How do I invite her to an event? How do I do a follow-up? How do I leverage a conversation? How do I thank her and steward? All of these things. Is the channel going to be email? Is the channel going to be a phone call? How am I going to be getting to that point? Well, very quickly, I've got a conversation. It's not an ask. We're just going to be reaching out to Margaret and we're going to be referencing maybe as a grateful patient, as an individual who's familiar with the hospital, that Dr. Raymond is going to be helping facilitate this and allowed his name to be used. And what our objective is to get a 30-minute meeting with her to have a coffee and just to have a conversation about what's taking place regarding the surgical wing. But when you start to look at it, this is where the coaching comes in. Okay, is this what I want to do? Do I want to send Margaret an email? How about if I try to reach her by phone? How about if I pick up the phone and call her? I want to get the right tone right. I want to get the timing right. I want this to be a successful follow-up. Second is there's a platform called iShare, and iShare is something that is the immersive reality platform that your donors, Margaret, Feldman, or anybody else can actually go and explore and actually do their own donor journey look at the priorities in the hospital, in the institution that match their priorities. See, a donor, the Feldmans, Margaret, or anybody else, they all have their own priorities. They all have their things that they like and they don't like. And when we start to look at the methodology around charitable giving, those organizations that aren't saying that this is our need, but they say this is the priority for our community. This is the priority for our alumni. This is the priority for our citizens or our patients or our physicians so they can be delivering the best medicine. And that's where donors start to go, oh, they're kind of like, this is the things that are the highest priority that could benefit me as an individual or people around me. And that's where the coaching piece, you go into it and you just go over and over and you practice and goes back to the point that James was making about trust. So if you want the donor to trust you, that you don't want to waste their time. You don't want to come in there unprepared for a meeting. And the coaching piece of this is essential. It's the glue that ties everything together. And that's really what is meant. So we can actually send this to Margaret, follow up with that, go to the next step. And here's Margaret, and this is where she lives. And we can actually play around with different scenarios around giving potential. So we're going to think about asking Margaret for $250,000. and we're going to structure it over 3 years. We're not asking Margaret for $250,000. We are training ourselves to prepare to go into a meeting with Margaret around these ideas, but we really want her to share with us where she's going and things that she's looking at. And if we use this as a think about number for Margaret without declaring it and disclosing it, I think it's a good start. So if we looked at $250,000, what's really, if she did over 3 years, we're going to know that it's going to be $83,333. And what the tax savings is going to be, what the tax deduction is going to be, what the donation is going to actually cost her. And then actually this gets saved. And then we go to the next step. And then what's the plan? Where are we at with Margaret? And we need to have, at this point, now that we've input all this information for Margaret, for Feldman, for the other prospects, we build a roadmap, a 90-day roadmap. And that roadmap is really geared towards how do we start the conversation? Where do we go? What happens next in week 2? What happens in week 3? Week 4, we're getting nowhere with Margaret. Can we actually park Margaret for the time being? Keep her informed about other things that are going on, but she's not ready to meet with us for whatever reasons they are. But we don't lose her, and then we start to move on to the Feldmans and all the other prospects. So it's really creating that efficiency and that trust for your board. So your board will actually know the process that you went through, or the physicians or the faculty or whoever happens to be are leverage points that they'll say, maybe there's something there that I can help you with. And then we start to build it from there. But you've got this track record for each and every individual. And then we kind of come to the end of it once we've built that roadmap, and we just thank Margaret. We just continue to go out, and the coaching model continues of how we can be engaging this to go to the next level. But when we start to think about this, and James, Kensho, anything at this point that you
I
want?
think the biggest thing is, using the power of AI, not to just, a lot of this you see is actually question and answering, but that's something that the AI is helping aid. And every single step, the AI is actually helping with the ideation, helping with the thinking, trained on a lot of kind of fundamental different things that we've trained the AI model on what are different ways that we talk to a donor, what are the ways that we can better improve the way we communicate with them, how do we leverage a personal side of this in the conversation. So what Bill was showing you is really the step-by-step process, but actually what's actually happening is, Bill, if you go back to the homepage right now,
Yeah.
if you go back, actually go press back actually.
Yeah.
I think if you go back and then we can click skip all the way down.
Yeah.
Continue, just click. So what's actually happening is every single input that was provided, from who the ideal client would be to what the organization is actually fed into the AI brain. And every time you click save of what your campaign is or what your strategy is or how you want to reach out, that is being fed into the AI. And then from there, you're actually training it so you never have to repeat it. And what that means is if you hire a new person and you have to go, instead of training them on everything that's happened on the campaign, the new person can literally go, hey, get me up to speed. This is everything that's happened. This is what you have to do. Oh, you were past Margaret Chen to talk to. This is everything that the last person who just left the company has had a conversation with. And this is how you should strategize to keep up. So a lot of that back and forth pre-communication you'd have to previously do is now connected through the AI brain or campaign brain. And that's going to be very powerful because we know some campaigns take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. How do you take that continuity from the first day you created that campaign all the way to the day you get that goal? Is having an AI that's constantly learning about the campaign and growing with your team and with the memory from there.
And this ties right into the organizational risk aspect too that the board is interested in because you're ensuring that organizational continuity. So, you're showing them that you've got this process. But I also want to say that, I coach dozens of people at any given time, fundraisers and executives and so on. And these are all the continuity and process questions that we deal with. So this is going to put coaches like me out of business, which is great because it's much more systematic. And as Kensho suggests, you've got that continuity over a 5-year period, fundraisers turnover, whatever. You can come in from day one and pop this up, and you're off and running, which is
I
very
will say
powerful.
to James's point, I actually disagree with the putting coaches out of business element. I always say AI does 80%
Oh,
of the
good.
work, and it's the human element, James, the history, the knowledge that you and
Mm,
every single person has had is something that no matter how much you train the AI, it will make decisions based on data. But James, you know, as a human, there's some things you have to tell the client, hey, actually, through my experience and through my real human use cases, I strongly, as a human, believe we shouldn't listen to the AI. That is all the value that you give. What the AI does is acts as an 80% aid to help with that intelligence. But what your team members are going to do with this is now think carefully or work with people like James to actually, hey, verify, is this really correct or not? And I think that's
so,
where a lot of us have to remove that whole notion of AI is going to replace us. Absolutely not. I've been in the industry for so many years. I have not met a single case where the AI has fully replaced it. It's just made their jobs better. It's reduced a lot of the manual crap that people have gotten used to it being a productive day of work, but rather given people more time to do what they love doing. Let's say in
mhm.
fundraising, if you love meeting the clients, but what you hated was checking the CRM and updating the CRM and checking all these type of things, what the AI does is do all of that boring stuff. So before you meet the donor or potential prospect, you can press one button, get me up to speed on everything, and everything that you used to have to remember is there. That is intelligence, and that is where it can help you, but you are still the one doing the conversation. You're still the one adding your human touch. You're still the one shaking hands or going for a lunch. That is something the human will be the core of, and I don't want it to replace ever,
Yeah,
as it gets better.
excellent
Yeah,
points.
and to that point, if you use AI to your advantage, AI will make you irreplaceable.
Correct.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things to take away is that where there's going to be a shift. I touched on it is on the database side, but also on the consulting side. The consultants that were coming in actually writing case for supports and writing emails and writing doing all that stuff for everybody, that's passe. That's gone by the wayside because you don't need to have consultants like us, like at Funding Matters, we'd be coming in and running campaigns. Well, I got to tell you that a lot of that campaign management, a lot of the information, whether it's planning studies or feasibility studies, we all know that that information is not as relevant and as valuable and as important to be incorporated into strategies as it once was. And the days that we would write a case for support for 18 months and nobody ever would read it would just like at our office, we've got a basement full of case for support still. It never got to the light of day. But that's where we're looking at how can we be crafting the strategies that implement and benefit organizations. So it's consultants aren't going to go away. Consultants will eventually be consulting to AI strategies and AI implementation. They're not going to be managing your campaigns for you because that's a huge expense that's just going out the window. And I can tell you how many organizations have called us and asked us to do feasibility and planning studies, and we said, do you know what? I think you're going to be wasting your money. You already know the answers to that. And there's a better way for you to make your investments in your development and towards advancement and fundraising success. But when we start to look at it, I'm going to leave you with one thing, and that is that there's a firm, a software firm in the U.S. that undertook a study and that basically surveyed organizations and the boards that adopted AI in the past year. So they looked at it over a 1 year period of time. They looked at those boards that embraced AI, and they looked at those organizations that didn't embrace AI. And the outcome was that they had an 11% increase in overall giving by those organizations that their boards embraced AI. They trusted AI. And I think that's one of the things to bear in mind is that Momentive is the name of the organization. So you might want to look them up. But it was just in the Chronicle of Philanthropy late last week. And that I think that is indicative of how organizations are looking at different solutions because those same organizations that didn't adopt AI in their lost major donors. they had a drop off in the number of major donors as opposed to an increase in revenue from their, I don't know if it's from their current donors or from new donors. It didn't say at that point, but it's indicative of how organizations are looking at incorporating this. And as we're on our journey to be building these types of solutions out, your feedback is always important. And one of the things that we would love to do is find a way to continue our conversation and have you ask any questions, whether it's of us or, now or somewhere that, looking at what are we looking at achieving and, what are we looking at as the next webinar topic is going to be focusing on the Grateful Donor journey. And that is what does that look like? Why do we need to have a conversation around that grateful donor journey? How are organizations going to be looking at engaging with their individuals? And that'll be next month. So I want to thank James and I want to thank Kensho and I want to thank our team, Vera and Chisa, as well for organizing this webinar and I also want to thank you for taking the time for joining us today.
I wonder, does anyone have any quick questions or anything? Might be a good 5 minutes. Oh, maybe not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Well.